Welcome to Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate. My name is Wendy Chamberlain, and if we haven't met before, I am a fully licensed real estate agent. I am a buyer's advocate or a buyer's agent and seller's advocate here in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. So welcome from wherever you might be around the world. Great to have you here today. So here is where we share all the adventures in real estate. So if you've listened into my previous episodes, you will know that we're having some fun and games with one of the properties we purchased for a client, where initially the renter threw a beer bottle at the drone for the building inspector when that was being done. Most recently, they're refusing to get out. And in further developments, it seems now that the company that was renting the property and then subletting those rooms, so renting it by the room to people on Centrelink or on welfare, that company now we've found out is deregistered, and the owners of the company are no longer returning phone calls. So at this point in time, it looks like that we're going to have to move settlement and push settlement out. So that adventure continues. I'll keep you updated as things progress there. Today, I wanted to share with you about, I previously shared about shenanigans of real estate agents, and I've got more than enough stories there. But it's not always the real estate agent that has the shenanigans going on, shall we say. We've worked with some selling clients, and they also have certain ideas around how things should be operating. And I wanted to share some of the stories. I had mentioned in one of our previous episodes about a particular client that we worked with who was selling their house. So let's delve a little bit further into that one. So this particular property was being sold by our clients. It had been at a point in time their primary residence, but they no longer lived there. It had been a rental for a little bit of while. They had moved out somewhere else, and it was a rental property, and the tenants had moved out of the property. So there was some, as you would expect, there was some wear and tear on the property, and that's normal and that's standard. And they wanted to get a few things fixed up on the property before we put it on the market. Perfectly fine. So they asked us if we knew anybody that could help with doing those updates around the home, from a handyman or a tradesperson, and we gave them the details of people that were able to help with that. And one of the tradesmen was employed by them and was fixing up some things around the home. So so that was interesting in itself, because as it turned out, he was able to share some insight with us. So we had things fixed up. We had the property staged for sale, and it was put on the market. So we had done the interview process to choose a real estate agent, had chosen and appointed a real estate agent for this particular sale, and the campaign was underway. So it was open for inspection, and people were coming through the property, inspecting the property, etc. So something a little bit peculiar started to happen with this vendor. So as the campaign continued on and on and on, they started to put their reserve up. They kept increasing their reserve. It was going up and up. So when the agent had originally come through, we'd obviously had a number of agents come through, and they'd given us their appraisal on what they felt the property value was. And so we passed that feedback to the client, the vendor, and saying this is where the property value sits. And the property value as assessed in the current market is important, because that's where the property needs to be marketed. You've probably heard of underquoting, and that's something we will discuss at some point. But in this particular instance, the agent had given them the idea of where they felt the property was valued, and we made a decision that that's where the property was going to be marketed. And based on that being advertised, home buyers were coming through the property and they were inspecting the property. So that was fine, and the campaign was going fine. It was going to auction, so we were running a 4-week campaign, so 3 weeks of opens and plus then auctioning it on the fourth weekend on the Saturday. But as I said, something strange started happening with the vendors, in that we were providing them the feedback of where the value of the home was, and what the buyers were saying in relation to the property value, and the vendors kept putting their price up and up and up. They were telling us that they wanted more money, and we thought, this is really strange. So at one point in time, there was something else that the tradesperson needed to go back in and fix something. Now, they were on site, and when they were on site, they were there when the owners were there, and the neighbours came over, and the neighbours were discussing with the vendor buying their property. And the conversation, so the tradesperson was there, and he was able to overhear this conversation. So I don't know if the vendor didn't realise or whatever. So the conversation that was happening between the neighbour and the vendor was that the neighbour wanted to buy the property, and the vendor decided that they didn't want to have to pay the commission to the real estate agent. And so that they were talking about doing a deal directly with the neighbour. Why they didn't decide all of this before, before they got us involved and before we had a real estate agent appointed to sell the property, I don't know. But they'd obviously decided through the campaign that the vendor, that the neighbour was interested in the property, and they were trying to save a little bit of money. So the tradesperson was there, and they heard all of this kind of stuff. And as I said, the reserve kept going up and up and up in all the conversations that we were having with the vendor when the agent was opening the home for sale and providing the feedback on where the buyers felt the value of the property was, etc. So the tradesman has told us this. So we had a conversation with the vendor and said, look, we have heard that your neighbour might be interested in buying the property. So here's the thing that they didn't realise. The neighbour had gone through the property at one of the public opens, which means that when the property was open for sale via the real estate agent, that the neighbour had gone through the home. Therefore, they were introduced to the home via the real estate agent. So the real estate agent basically was still entitled to be paid their commission. So the vendor was thinking that because they were going to do this deal with their neighbour, they could cut out the agent and just get the deal done with the neighbour. They didn't want somebody else to buy the property. They wanted the neighbour because they thought that they wouldn't have to pay the agent's commission. So we said, it doesn't work that way. The neighbour has come through a public open, which is via the real estate agent that's been appointed to sell your property. So if you want to go ahead and sell the property to your neighbour, you can do that. However, you still have to pay the agent's commission because the agent opened the home and introduced the neighbour to the property. The property was on the market and they came through the public open. Well, that was very interesting because guess what happened then? The reserve dropped like a stone. It actually came way, way down. And so the vendor had been pumping up their reserve to put off all the other buyers. So when the property went to auction, the reserve was way too high. No one would bid on the property, and then they could sell it to the neighbour and not have to pay the agent commission because they'd do this deal. Well, that little bubble got burst pretty quickly when they realised they would still have to pay the agent's commission. So the property went to auction, and on the day of the auction, which was early afternoon, by the time of the auction, one of our clients obviously had started drinking a little bit earlier in the day, and by the time of the auction, they were absolutely plastered. So they were there and they were drunk as a skunk. As it turns out, the property did sell at the auction, and it sold to one of the buyers that had come through the property that was not the neighbour. So the neighbour never ended up buying the property. The vendor ended up having to pay the agent's commission, and the property got sold. So it's not always shenanigans purely on the side of the real estate agent. Sometimes vendors have their own ideas about what might be happening at a property. We had another client that we were selling a property for. This one was in the west of Melbourne. And this particular property, very nice property, it was in an estate, and it was the one of the display homes. Originally, 25 years ago, it was display home. in this particular, what would have been the housing estate. And so we had a conversation with the vendor about what, if anything, needed to be updated. This is one of the things to think about when you're putting your home on the market. What do you spend your money on, and what do you leave as is? Because your taste, my taste, is different to a buyer's taste. And sometimes it's not worth spending all this money to update a property when the incoming purchaser may not even like your taste and may just plan on changing things up. So back 25 years ago when this property was on the market, and it would have been, you know, the bee's knees property, the walls were mint green and a lot of the tiles were green. The kitchen, parts of the kitchen were green. So look, it would have been great then, but it was a bit dated. We had the conversation about what should we do, because the problem is when you start changing one thing in a property that is older, it makes everything else in the property look out of date. So for example, if you were to update the kitchen, it makes other things out of date. Or even just change taps or change a vanity, whatever you might do, then other parts of the home start to look dated. So we spoke to the vendor, we spoke to the agent about what they felt would be the updates that were required for that demographic, for that market. And we decided that all we really needed to do was paint the walls white. So get rid of the mint green and paint the walls white. One of the vanities in the bathroom, in the ensuite bathroom, I think it was, had a crack in it. So we changed and updated the sink or the vanity in there. So that was fixed up. That's all we did. In the kitchen, where you would stand in the corner of the kitchen, say on the bench or at the sink, because that was a high traffic area, and the tiles, it was tiled. There was white tiles, you know, tiles like however big tiles are. They were cracked. But we decided, look, we'll just leave them because it's really difficult to match tiles. And if you just changed out those tiles, then that makes the rest, it wouldn't match the rest of the kitchen, and it would, you basically have to rip out the whole thing. So we just made a decision there that we would leave those tiles there. Yes, some were cracked, but rather than pull out the whole thing, because all of this adds expense. And there's a rule in real estate of how many dollars you spend versus your return. It's usually for every dollar spent, you want to have $3 in return. And there just wasn't going to be that return there. So we decided just to leave the tiles in the kitchen. The whole house was given a repaint in white instead of the green. And the other major thing that happened, because our clients were living there with 2 little kids, and there was stuff everywhere. It was just cluttered. You know what it's like with kids, that they got stuff everywhere. So they actually decided to move out of the property so that they could take a lot of that stuff out. They left a lot of their furniture there, but they just cleaned and decluttered. So there weren't toys everywhere, and that made a massive, massive difference. When the property had been painted and I walked back into that property, it was like a different property because it was just light and bright. So that was great. So we ran the campaign for that auction like we normally do. Again, 3 weeks, an auction on the 4th weekend, and we were providing the feedback from the buyers of where the value of the property sat. So once the property had been updated, we had the agent to come and have a look again, and they gave us their appraisal on, it was the agent that had been appointed. We'd done the interview process, we'd chosen the agent, got their feedback on what to fix up, which is what we had done, got them back in, and they gave us an idea of where the price was. So all through the campaign, as people were coming through, buyers giving their feedback, the agent giving the feedback on what the buyers were saying in relation to the value, that the property was round about the value was round about the mid-6s was where all the feedback on the property value was. So when you're sending a property to auction, we say to our clients, look, because often people, they're having conversations through the campaign about what their price is, what it is, what's the number that they're prepared to give their property away for, to sell their property for. So this can be like it can go back and forth over the course of the weeks. However, they obviously, on the auction day, they need to have chosen what that figure is. Often there's a dream price, but then there's a price that what we're prepared to sell for. So, and again, based on all the feedback that we had been giving the client through the campaign, mid-sixes was where the property sat. So I remember this. On the day of the auction, we had the open. So generally the open is for 30 minutes before the auction. So let's say the auction was at 12 o'clock. You'd have the open for inspection from 11:30 to 12. The vendors are there, but they just disappear or pretend to be one of the buyers, but they'll disappear. And then we just say, come back about 5 minutes before the auction starts. They come in. The agent asks all the people to leave, to go out on the street. And we have a quick conversation with the vendor and the agent around which buyers have shown up, the ones that have expressed interest, are they there? The ones that have said that they're going to probably look at bidding. And then, of course, the the question that we need to know is, what's your reserve? And this is based on the feedback and everything that we've been giving the vendor. And it was mid-sixes is where the values, where buyers were seeing the value, where other comparable properties in the market in that particular area where they were sitting. And the vendor turned around and said 725. So that's 75,000 above where we had been getting the feedback. But more than that, it's above the guide price that the agent had been advertising. So let's say they'd been advertising at 6 to 650. On the day of the auction, the vendor comes out, one person selling the property comes out and says they want 725, which is way over what's been advertised to the market. So when you talk about underquoting, and agents get in trouble for this all the time, but I can tell you it's not always the agent's fault. I have seen many, many times the vendor come out on the day of the auction, even though comparable sales sit at a certain price point and the buyer feedback sits at a certain price point, and you give all this feedback to the vendor that your house is worth in a certain price point, they come out with this other figure which is way over. Happens so often. And I remember the auctioneer, so we're standing there and the vendors have said this is their price. The auctioneer has looked at me, looked back at the vendor and gone, right, okay, and walked out. And I'm thinking, where has that come from? That figure, that was never discussed, never indicated that way. Anyway, auctioneer goes out on the street, starts the auction. As it turns out, the market was very buoyant at the time. As it turns out, people started bidding, it hit that number, and then it got some even more. It flew over that number. So the vendor achieved a very, very good result that day. But no indication prior to that day was that it was at that kind of level. The buyers weren't giving that feedback. The comparable sales of other homes that had recently sold wasn't giving that feedback. So it's just interesting. This is part of the fascination of auctions, because obviously we buy houses for clients, we sell houses for clients, and you just can't pick it. Most of the time you can't pick it, because you'll have people inspecting a home, a buyer inspecting a home and saying that they're not interested, and then they show up and bid like crazy to buy a house on the auction day. Other side of the coin, you'll have people that say they are interested and then they don't show up. That's happened too. We had a property for auction, and we had 5 people that had expressed interest in the property. And then, so in the week up, and keep checking in. The auction was on the Saturday. On the Friday night, our key primary buyer messaged to say they weren't interested. And so then on the morning of the auction, so of the 4 people that were left, 1 showed up. The property got passed into that person, that buyer, and then we ended up negotiating and selling it to that buyer. But you cannot pick it. And you'll have other times people come along and they'll say they're not interested, or literally they will see a pointer board on the corner of a street. They'll drive down the street, stop, get out of their car. They'll have not inspected the property. They'll have not done any of the due diligence. They won't have had contracts checks. They won't have had building inspections done, nothing. If they get there early enough, they can have a quick whip around. And that happens a lot. The agents are shutting the door because we're talking to the vendor and about to start the auction. And I just want to have a look. And they'll run around and literally 2 minutes in a house and they'll start bidding and they'll buy houses. And it just blows my mind, because the amount of times as a buyer's agent, buyer's advocate, that we have pulled out of proceeding to buy a property based on the building and pest failing. It happens a lot. One client we worked with for 11 months, six properties failed building and pest. That's why it took 11 months, because the properties kept failing building and pest. So I always suggest to clients getting a building and pest inspection. So what I'm suggesting then to you is it's not always the agent's fault when a property goes way over on price, or when they've advertised a property in a certain price bracket and then it sells for a lot more. It's not to say it's not never, because I can give you lots of underquoting stories, and we'll cover some of those in a future episode on Property Mama, on those adventures in real estate. But what I'm saying is that we're dealing with humans, and humans are emotional, and there's and I say this to our clients, there's the value property price that you might put it at, the price of the property might put it at, but then there's an emotional price. So sometimes that's your overs price, and I see that at auction all the time. I can look at people bidding at auction, and I know, I can see, I can read body language when they've hit their budget, because they start moving differently, but they still keep bidding. They still keep bidding, and they go over. I remember we were looking at a property to buy a property for a client interstate, and we were looking at houses in out to the east in Box Hill. And one particular property, the auction started, and it very quickly went over our budget. And there was two buyers standing there, two Chinese, different people, but two Chinese buyers standing there, and they started going head to head. Two blokes started going head to head, and it was like 20, 30, 40, 50. And it just became this, basically a contest to see who could outbid each other to buy this particular property. And it went way over the value of the property. Anyway, one of these buyers ended up having the property sold to them. And I remember saying to my clients, I thought, that's way over. Like, that property is not worth what that person just bid and purchased that property at. Anyway, a few weeks later, we were still looking for our client, and I spoke to that agent that was the listing agent on that particular sale. And he said, funny story, that particular buyer, so you bid at auction, it's unconditional under the hammer. And so you walk in and you are required to sit down and you sign the paperwork. It's why the agents come around, come and basically grab you and start chatting to you and take you inside, because they need you to sit down and sign the paperwork. Because until you've signed the paperwork, you have not actually purchased the property. Technically you have, but you haven't signed the paperwork. So you need to sit down and sign the paperwork. So apparently this guy's walked in and he said to the agent, he says, oh, I think I might have overpaid. And the agent said, maybe, sign here. And the guy signed, and yes, he did overpay. I think he realised he got caught up in the emotion of auctions. And I see it all the time. It's why we get appointed to work with clients to bid for them at auction. So we do have a bid at auction service for that reason, because I love real estate. I say I love real estate. But people get so caught up in the emotion of an auction and buying real estate. And if you've got a really skilled, clever, experienced auctioneer, they know exactly how to get you. They know exactly how to get you in and get emotional about that particular property. They know all the scripts and dialogue, what to use on you to get you to bid more. That's their job. Their job is to get more money out of you for their vendor. Their vendor is their client. You are not their client. And they are very, very skilled at what they do. And you get caught up in your emotion and people bid like crazy and you go over your budget. When you work with us, we don't get emotional about it. We do not get emotional. We have a conversation with you about what the budget is, where we see the value in this particular home, and we have that, and that's our budget. That's as far as we go. So if you feel that you would get emotional and perhaps go over your budget, then you need to come and talk to us, because that is what we do. We make sure that I'm Switzerland. I love real estate, but I'm Switzerland. all our team know that the budget is the budget. We don't go over. So auctions are amazing, are fabulous. So vendors, people selling their homes, yeah, look, they're human as well, and they do funny things as well. I remember I had a conversation with a real estate agent, and the vendor, this is really funny. Oftentimes when you're looking to buy your property, you stage the home for sale. You put in staging furniture, presentation furniture. Sometimes if you're living in the home, you can just do like a supplemental pieces of pillows and throws, that kind of thing. But if you have the means to have somewhere else to go, and you can stage your property for sale, which means all the staging furniture comes in and it's all presented beautifully, everything, not a hair out of place. It actually works. It actually presents a beautiful picture for an incoming buyer. So staging homes work. And we do suggest to clients that if they've got somewhere else to go and they can vacate the house, then the house is just available. Or even if you're having to live there, that you keep it as like a show home. An agent was telling me about this particular vendor that it must have been an investment property. So he wanted to sell his investment property. So the tenants were no longer there, and he had the house staged for sale. But he decided that he wanted to earn some income through the weeks of the sale. So generally, as I mentioned, when you have an auction, it's usually 3 weeks of opens, and then on the fourth weekend, you auction the property. So basically there's 4 weeks and often 5 to 6 weeks where a property is not occupied. You've got a couple of weeks getting photos, getting the staging furniture in, and then the actual 4 weeks of the campaign. That's if it sells, and then it'll be further after that if it doesn't sell. And then you've got your settlement period after that. So this particular person decided to put the rental furniture in there, which is great. And so it was presented beautifully. What they didn't say to the agent is that they then put the property on Airbnb, and they were renting out the property on Airbnb through the campaign. They just didn't tell the agent that. And they didn't also tell the staging company that. Now, the staging furniture is not for you to utilise. It's there. Like half the time you can't even sit on these things. When the beds are made up, they're not necessarily proper beds. And I've seen people go and sit on a bed in a property for sale, and it's gone whoop because it's on boxes, all this kind of stuff. You don't necessarily, they're not functional. A lot of the time the things aren't functional, but this person, he was renting it out by the night on Airbnb. And the agent found out about this and he goes, you can't do that because it's not your furniture. You've paid to rent it. You haven't actually hired the furniture to be living in the property. And the vendor just ignored the agent and just continued to put the property on Airbnb through the campaign of selling the property. Humans, what do you do? And then obviously the rental hire furniture company found out about it, and they said, you can't do that. And they went in and they took their furniture out. So the property wasn't sold, but because he was renting out by the day on Airbnb on their furniture, they said, no, we're taking the furniture out. So, yeah, vendors can be interesting. They can be very, very interesting when it comes to selling properties. So I just wanted to share that with you because it's not just the real estate agents. We're dealing with buyers, we're dealing with sellers, we're dealing with real estate agents, and all the various other trades as well that come into play when it comes to real estate. So if you are looking to get some support when it comes to buying a property or selling a property, we are here to help. Our team and myself are trained. I've been buying and selling real estate for 28 years. And so we know what it takes to negotiate to purchase a property, how to bid at auction, how to find properties. It's through our relationships with real estate agents. I know a lot of real estate agents, and that's how we find off-market properties. So off-market, what does that mean? It means not advertised. So sometimes they're referred to as pocket listings, secret listings. Off-market is not advertised. You've got pre-market as well. Pre-market is something that's coming to the market, but the vendor will sell it beforehand. So those we find out about those via our relationships. We've got an off-market that a client's going to have a look at next week, because when I spoke to that real estate agent and I said, this is a client spec, this is what they're looking for, what have you got? He literally was about to sign the paperwork to list this particular property. He hadn't even listed it at that point. He said, I'm about to sign the paperwork, blah, blah, blah. And that was 2 weeks ago. And he has been chasing the tenant, the renter, to get a time to get into the property. So we've talked about working with renters as well. So this particular renter clearly doesn't want anybody in the property, but you don't own the property. It's not your choice, unfortunately, for the person renting. So he's finally got the renter to agree to a time next week for us to have a look at the property. So we're going to go have a look at that. As I said, it's off market, not advertised to anyone else at the moment. And so fingers crossed that one will suit, and we'll be able to buy that property as well. So if you're, as I said, looking for that support in the market, we're here to help you. If you feel like you just need your hand held and can work through your own pace at looking at buying a property, I've got my Get Started in Property program as well. So getstartedinproperty.com.au is my self-paced step-by-step program where you basically follow the bouncing ball. I've packaged up my 28 years of knowledge in real estate to step you through each of the stages that you need to understand in the order that you need to do them, so that you too can find a property, buy a property. Even if you might be thinking, well, I could never do that, I can't speak to real estate agents, I wouldn't know what to say. We've got scripts, we've put scripts together of exactly what it is you need to say, who do you need to speak to, how to become an area specialist in the area that you're looking, all the things, every single step, because there are so many moving parts when it comes to buying a property. And I've basically chunked it all down for you. You can, it's a month by month. We drop 2 modules per month, and you can follow it through at whatever pace suits you in the pockets of your time, and get started in property and finally own your own home. If you are interested in buyer advocacy, buyer's agent, that service that we offer for you, please get in touch, chamberlainadvocates.com.au. We are licensed now in Tasmania as well as Victoria. So if that's you and you do need that supporting helping hand, we bid at auction for you. So if you might have found a property and it's going to auction and you might not be available, we had an inquiry that week, someone's got a wedding. And it's a close family member apparently, so they're not going to be able to zip out. And so they've approached us to bid at auction for them. That's what we do. If you've found a property and you wish us to negotiate to purchase the property, we do that as well. Or if you want our full service, which includes being able to find properties that are not advertised, those off-market properties that we mentioned, then that's our full service. We work with people locally, interstate, overseas, expats coming back. If someone's looking to downsize, we support them with the sale of their property and getting them into another property. Just have a conversation with us. We will be able to help you. Just reach out, go to chamberlainadvocates.com.au, or just send us a message through our social channels and we will be in touch with you. So any questions, or if you've got any particular topics in relation to real estate you'd love me to cover in a future episode, also reach out, because I'll be happy to share any of my insight or adventures in that realm as well. So thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate, and I really look forward to chatting to you and seeing you again soon. Bye-bye for now.